some of these really energy from the vacuum and some of these things. And, and I think that may be some of the reason people have misunderstanding about, water fuel is I think that a lot of the people who, have had cars that run on water, so to speak, they're really tapping into, an environmental energy phenomena that allows some of these things to happen.
Yes.
And so if you look at it in that way, you're not breaking any laws of physics. You've just found a new, a new source like the sun, but it's, different.
Yeah. And it's not to say, as you said when you mentioned Tesla, that this has not already been known. It's just that, again, the energy players have suppressed the very thought of investigating it. That's why Tesla's name was written out of history books.
Well, yeah, when you talk to people about Tesla, some people have heard of him, but they just think, oh, well, AC power, but he did a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's interesting that Tesla won the Edison Award.
Yeah.
By the Association of Electrical Engineers. And shouldn't it have been the other way around?
You would think so.
Yeah. Except that Tesla would never have given an award to someone who cheated him out of $50,000.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's probably the research that, overall, I think hydrogen boosting is something we need to do now. But I think to really replace, the need for fuels, we need to do something like what Tesla was doing.
Yeah, so in the meantime, we've got all these clunkers, as the government is calling them now, clunkers that instead of being shredded could actually be turned into the greener vehicles that they're encouraging people to buy simply by putting one of these devices under the hood. If you can overcome the ECU and the way it wants to dump fuel in these clunkers, then the hydrogen boosting could actually turn any car into something green, or greener than what it was.
It kind of makes you wonder why they want to get all these older cars off the road. I mean, I looked at the list of the cars that they're using for the cash for clunker, and some of them are like, year 2000. I mean, I have a car that's 2002 and a car that's 99, and I feel like those, aren't super old, but those are cars that would be considered clunkers.
Well, what's interesting is that they're actually following, and I haven't heard anyone really mention this in the media, but years ago, I guess it was maybe 25 years ago, I saw a slide presentation by a Japanese missionary who was serving in Taiwan, and he showed a slide of some of the old clunkers in Taiwan, and he said, and this is way back then, he said, well, in Japan, we have to get rid of our vehicles every 10 years.
Right.
They impose such a heavy tax on a 10-year-old vehicle that it's not worth having it anymore, and they do this to stimulate the economy, to keep the automotive industry continuously producing new vehicles for the Japanese population.
Right.
Now, he said that 25 years ago, and here we are in 2009 following that example in the United States.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie Flash of Genius? No. It's this movie about this guy who invented the automatic wiper, where it will the intermittent wiper, and how he was really basically his invention was stolen from him.
Oh yeah, I knew about that story, but I didn't know it was made into a movie.
Yeah, they just recently made it into a movie, and I thought that was very interesting in relation to some of the stuff that we're trying to do.
Now that guy finally did win against GM, wasn't it?
I think it was Ford.
Was it Ford who stole his idea for intermittent wiper? Yeah. What a great idea, And finally he was vindicated in court, wasn't he? Yeah.
I just think I guess that just shows just to keep persistent with it, and
Yeah, in other words, all of us have to carry the torch in some way until the day comes when society in general, and I think of in Homer's The Odyssey, I guess the lead character Odysseus, he made a statement. He said, because he had such trouble at sea. He said, I'm going to go so far inland. In fact, he says, I'm not going to stop until someone sees me carrying this oar over my shoulder, and they say, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
He says, that's when I'm going to stop, when I've traveled far enough inland that they don't even know what an oar is. Well, in a sense, I think that's the way we are with this technology. We have to just keep running with this ball until you're talking to a perfect stranger and you mention hydrogen from water and the benefits of it, and they say, oh, yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's getting to that point. I'm meeting people every day more and more that are already familiar with this technology. And just a few years ago, nobody knew about it.
Right.
So
well, I
get
think
enough
what
people
would
to know
help,
about something.
I think it would really help, you know, with the scientific community and the media and such if we had a PhD thesis work, papers published, you know, with this technology, you know, just showing its validity. Because I think a lot of the people, when they, you know, try to start a company and you try to look for, you know it works, but to get investors, you have to have proof. They want proof, and that proof is, you know, where you find it is, you know, the guy in his garage, and, you know, they don't consider that proof. I mean, I've been contacted by several people, you know, just because my paper is, you know, gone out, you know, online, and several people, you know, wanting to check out my paper as far as proof. So, you know, and it's just detailing information that's been compiled that was already out there. I haven't, you know, wrote a paper on my own testing.
Now, can you mention some of the other things that you included in that compilation? Was there something from NASA, or?
Let me bring it up here. Basically, it covers, I go through the introduction, I just basically talk about general, like, the problem that we have, you know, with burning fuels, and then I talk about the theory of how an engine works, and then I go through different methods for how you, you know, actually what properties of hydrogen help you, you know, make this work. You know, and some of those are, you know, that hydrogen has a really lean burn. It's a fast burning fuel, and so that allows the efficiency to be increased. And so then I go through the studies of different universities who have done research with tanked hydrogen, and, you know, what their results were as far as efficiency, fuel consumption, and emissions. And then I go into...
apparently these studies were all favorable to use of hydrogen.
Yeah, they're positive. They're more along the lines of that professor we talked about in the beginning who thinks you need 10%. But, you know, it's something, you know, to start out with. And so then I go into, well, how do we get the hydrogen? You know, you can have, you know, just carry a tank along with you. You could use a fuel reformer, or you could use electrolysis. And so then there's one university, I think it's University of Windsor, they did a study with, well, they were going to simulate electrolysis products. And so what they did was they mixed a tank of air with 2% hydrogen, 1% oxygen, and 98% air, and they called that electrolysis gas. And so then they put that into the engine, and they concluded that the benefits they got from that, you know, weren't enough to, you know, really, you know, to make up for the cost of the electricity that they were using to make the hydrogen. And so they said, well, that's not possible. And then, so then I compare that study, which was somewhat of a theoretical type study, and to like that university in Turkey where they actually put hydrogen cells on cars, and they saw, you know, anywhere from 25 to 40% improvement. And so basically my conclusion was, well, there's obviously something going on that we don't understand, the difference between a real electrolyzer and a tank of hydrogen. And then I go into just basically some of the theories that Yule Brown had about the properties of electrolysis gas or Brown's gas. You know, why there may be a difference between those studies is because of the, you know, the difference in the properties and